pictures that I have seen, the first thing that comes to mind is the potential for human error. Anytime you have a train at a reported speed approaching a curve, it raises questions, and it's not uncommon to see something like this happen, given that in Philadelphia in 2015, we had an incident with Amtrak where the train, the engineer lost situational awareness, and there was no, in essence, safety backup. So he was going 100 miles an hour on a curve that was designed for 50 miles an hour. And as a result, the train derailed and people died, unfortunately. And that's one of the technologies that positive train control is designed to cover, is the human error in that situation.
Why don't we have this on all of our trains when we've had this many fatalities and lives lost, even just since 2015?
Unfortunately, because many agencies throughout the country have dragged their feet because of the cost and the complexity. I was very proud of the Metrolink commuter rail system to be the first in the nation to have this operational, but given the fact that this happened in Philadelphia and the mandate has existed since 2008, it really is inexcusable that people still continue to die. And we don't know for sure what happened in this case, but positive train control prevents so many situations of human error, and as a result, it really is inexcusable to be running trains at a high speed and not have this technology in place.
So let's explain positive train control, and then just one more comment. If I'm going 100 miles an hour in my car, I sure know I'm going 100 and not 50. Is it different when you're, the engineer of a train?
Well, I'll tell you why it potentially is different. Engineers can get distracted. It's dark when they're out there, and we don't know what this situation was. So did this person not get enough sleep? Was this person having personal issues at home such that they were distracted? And so as a result, in Philadelphia, this person that was the engineer believed he was on a straightaway that had a speed limit of 100 miles an hour, when in fact that's not where he was on the track system. So as a result, he was confused. And when you get confused like that, then bad things can happen if you don't have a backup safety system.
Well, so I want to ask you about, I'm sorry to interrupt, but about training, because before you move on from the point that you just made, if they don't know where they are on their route, where does training come into play? Because we're talking about a maiden voyage here where potentially this was one of the first few times that this engineer was taking this route.
Well, again, that's something the NTSB will look at exhaustively. They do a head-to-toe analysis, and they will look at the training records for this particular engineer. They will look at the tracks, the physical equipment, and that's the reason their investigations take between 12 and 18 months in order to complete them and do a thorough job and make recommendations.
And certainly this is only going to, feed controversy over these sorts of controls on trains. And when you put human lives next to just the cost of something like this that could prevent all these fatalities, I can't believe that is not more controversial. Keith, having been through an investigation before, like the one in Pennsylvania, a conversation we've been having today is how long is this investigation on the ground going to take to complete? Because as you know, I-5 is very important for not only our state, but for Oregon, for California, in this route. So when you take a look at this and take a look at the scene, how long do you think it's going to take for NTSB to do what they need to do on the ground and to have this kind of moved?
Well, to answer your question, number one, the NTSB will take as long as they deem necessary in order to secure the equipment, secure the track, the signals, the devices. In terms of an actual time frame, my estimate would be probably you're looking at 3 to 4 days minimum, and it could be longer than that. My recollection was Chatsworth was about a week's period of time before trains could roll through there again, and it looked to me from the aerials that this was in a section of single track, so that obviously presents greater challenges as well, having one passageway through there.
Will they go back and reconstruct all of it like they do with an airplane or a helicopter in some giant warehouse, or just certain parts of the train?
Well, they'll take pieces and look at them to do their analysis. I don't know if they'll necessarily reconstruct it, but they will look at every particular piece to see what role, if any, it had in the accident and how it performed in the accident. Was there any type of mechanical failure? Was there a stress failure? And you have different experts at the NTSB that examine different components. So some will look at the computer analysis, tapes, things like that. Some will look at wheels, some will look at braking systems, some will look at human factors. You know, what was this engineer going through? What was going on in his or her world? What type of sleep did they get? What type of training did they get? For example, with the engineer in Philadelphia, part of the focus that caused him to become unaware was the fact that a rock had been thrown at a different train, and there was some evidence of him being on the radio, observing, listening, perhaps interacting with respect to that situation, and becoming focused on that as opposed to focused on the train operations.
Is it common practice to have basically a second pair of eyes? So you've got your engineer and you've got the conductor, but how do they kind of orchestrate running the train safely? Is that common practice to have somebody else kind of as a backup, like a co-pilot?
No, it is not common practice to have a second person in the cab area, and some studies have shown that in most situations, having a second person can actually be more detrimental because people tend to talk, tend to socialize, and there was an incident down in Southern California where there were a second set of eyes immediately after Chatsworth during the operations in light of the engineer text messaging, and there was a red light violation because each person thought the other one was going to be stopping the train, so they reacted too slowly. So it is not common. It doesn't necessarily make the train more safe. It often makes it less safe. And really what you need is this positive train control technology to become a higher priority for implementation. And unfortunately, Amtrak has been very slow at their implementation. And the West Coast especially often plays second fiddle to the Northeast Corridor, which is the corridor back east where the politicians who fund Amtrak all ride. So that was the first system that Amtrak dealt with. They haven't even done, down in Southern California, getting the positive train control up and running. So our trains in Metrolink all have positive trains control, but the Amtrak trains don't. So that, we keep pushing and pushing and pushing down there to get that implemented.
Can you please explain, just for those of us who don't know, how that works?
Sure. Positive train control is a satellite-based technology, and there's an onboard computer. And to implement it, you have to map your system so that the computer knows all the turns, where all the signals are. And before you start on a route, you punch in the route that you're going, kind of like a GPS, and it then talks to the satellite as you're going along. So the computer will know that a track speed is, let's say, 79 miles an hour. If you're exceeding that, what happens is the satellite sends that down to the computer that you're exceeding that, and the computer takes over the operation of the train. So if you're approaching a curve, and if indeed it was a 30-mile-an-hour curve and you're going 81, the computer would receive a signal from the satellite, would take over the operations from the operator, and bring the train to a halt and slow it down before you had a tragedy occur.
This is a no-brainer. I mean, this is criminal that it's just money that's holding this back from saving lives.
Well, and I think what freaks me out so much, to be blunt, Keith, about what you're telling us, and I'm learning a lot of new things by listening to, and we appreciate your insight, is that the lives of these people on these trains rely so much on the ability of this one individual to perform their job. And as you mentioned, Keith, I mean, who knows what's distracting them, whether it's sleep or something personal or something happening outside the train that gets their attention for just a brief moment. I did not realize prior to our conversation with you that it really relied so much on the ability of one person to do their job well. It's pretty scary.
And people do their job every day, and if they're focused, it's not a problem. It's not an issue. There are ways to bring the train to a stop. If an engineer was incapacitated, they have I'll call it, it used to be called a dead man switch, because if something happened, they had to hold the switch the whole time on the throttle, and if they let go, let's say they had a heart attack or something, it would stop. There's an alerter system on the trains. So generally, you don't have any kind of problems or issues, but now we do have this technology. It is expensive. It does take time to install, but the mandate from Congress has been in place since 2008, and cost and timing and difficult technology is not an excuse at this point.
Rare as it may be, go ahead, sorry.
If it could be done, if it could be done in Southern California, which is probably the most dense and complex operating the environment for train systems in the country, given the fact that we have shared lines, multiple users, there's no reason it can't be done everywhere else.
Yeah, it's a great point, Keith. And I was going to say, rare as it may be, I think many people will be asking that question about positive train control the next time they get on board a train. Let's talk about the black box. I'm interested, what specific information are they looking for in the black box on board this train?
The black box is not as sophisticated as you would find on an airliner, but what they will be looking at in the information it will record includes the speed of the train. It includes actions of the engineer in terms of the throttle, where the position of the throttle was, when it was pulled back, the braking. Did they start to brake at any point in time? How much of the brakes were applied? And did it ever go into a full emergency braking mode? And those are all things that will be revealed as part of the investigation in the black box. And so they'll be able to tell exactly how fast it was going, were the brakes applied, when were they applied, or was there any type of sounding of a horn, if there was some obstruction on the track or person on the track, were they blowing the horn? All that will be analyzed and revealed.
So, Mr. Millhouse, sorry, Marty, the train was on its inaugural first public run. They'd already done some runs with dignitaries, going over this new section, over this new trestle. It hadn't even quite gotten to the trestle yet. Is it possible that the engineer had never been on this new curve, this new section, or is that completely no way that happened?
I would find that extremely unlikely. Typically, when you're testing for new systems, you do an extensive test, you do extensive training of your personnel. I would be shocked if they just threw somebody on board that didn't have any experience with this route or familiarity with it.
Yeah, because to see the curve there, and you said it's dark and may not, sometimes they don't know exactly where they are at all times.